She showed up in the middle of a storm, trembling, soaked to the bone, asking for nothing but a place to stay till morning. I didn't even know her name. But when she left the next day, after one quiet phone call, my whole life changed forever. The rain had a way of swallowing the street, turning every sound into a hush that made the building feel older than it was. Mark stood by the living room window with one blind slanted open, palm against the cool glass, watching the downpour crawl along the pane like it meant to stay. The radiator clicked and sighed without adding real warmth. In the hallway, a laundry basket waited for a second wind he didn't have. Somewhere behind him, a clock ticked too loud for the size of the room. He told himself he was only checking the weather before turning in. That was true for 3 seconds, until he saw her, a figure at the curb under the broken streetlight, hair slicked to her face, arms folded tight across a soaked jacket. Not pacing, not begging, just standing, like there should have been a door where there wasn't one. She kept her head tipped, as if listening for something that might rescue her and knew it probably wouldn't. He pulled the blind a little higher and felt the old cord scrape his fingers. Instinct said, don't. He had Lily asleep down the short hall with a nightlight casting a small moon over a wall where crayon suns still peeked around tape drawings. He was a dad first, a man second, and the distance between those two facts was usually enough to stop him from doing anything impulsive. He let go of the blind, and it clicked against the sill. Another gust pressed rain like gravel against the window. He tried to step away, but the image of her stayed put, as if it had lodged behind his ribs. He knew the look, the kind of quiet that comes after a day that refused to make room for you. He had worn it himself in the mirror more evenings than he liked to count. After the late shift at the shop, after the bills lined up like accusations, after the landlord's voice turned short. He recognized the posture of someone bracing without asking for help. He told himself stories to make turning away easier. Maybe she was waiting for a ride. Maybe she lived in the next building and forgot her keys. Maybe somebody would pull up any minute, headlights cutting the rain, problem solved. He checked the empty street. No headlights, no shape of a car, just a trash bin rocked by wind and the thin glow from the bodega sign 2 blocks over. His eyes moved to the hallway. Lily had left her bedroom door partway open the way she always did, because it made the house feel less like it could disappear while she slept. He listened for her breathing. Steady. Safe. He could lock the deadbolt and turn off the lamp and pretend he hadn't seen the woman. That was the smart play. That was the safe play. He pressed his thumb into the scar on his knuckle, the one from a stripped bolt last winter, and thought of the way Lily's small hand had rested there that morning while she asked if the heater would be fixed by Friday. He'd said yes because dads say yes even when it's a maybe. He reached for the chain on the door and stopped again. Who opens their door to a stranger in the middle of a storm? Someone careless, someone desperate, or someone who still believed in things he had no business believing in. He tried to measure it, a father's caution on one side, a person's duty on the other, and found the scale refused to settle. She shifted under the streetlight, just a small movement, enough for her to look up and blink back the water. He saw her face more clearly. Not a plea, not a threat, just a kind of tired that didn't belong to a single night. It hit him in a place he kept quiet. 3 years of setting an extra plate, and then putting it back. 3 years of telling a little girl that yes, Mom could still hear good night if you whispered hard enough. 3 years of counting coins with the lights off, letting the darkness make the math softer than it was. He tried to imagine explaining this to Lily if it went wrong. He tried to imagine explaining it to himself if he did nothing. The first picture scared him, the second embarrassed him. He stepped closer to the peephole, then away from it. The lamp threw his shadow across the floor, long enough to cross the door. He found his keys on the hook, not because he needed them, but because holding them steadied his hands. The room felt smaller with the decision circling it. He checked the chain a final time, deadbolt set, hinge sound, not because he planned to shut her out, but because he needed to know he could shut the world back out if he had to. He realized he was stalling and almost laughed at himself, stalling in a room that stalled him daily. He looked again down the hall. No movement. A soft sigh from Lily, the kind that always made him think of small sailboats on a lake he'd never taken her to. Okay, he said, not to anyone in particular. The word felt like it changed the air. He lifted the chain just enough to ease the door open on the first catch. Cold air pushed in, full of damp and distant traffic. He leaned his shoulder to the frame and called out, steady as he could make it. "Hey, are you okay?" The woman startled, not wildly, just that quick flinch of someone who lives ready to step back. She turned partway toward the voice and the light that spilled through the door. For a second the rain made a curtain between them, beads bright in the hallway glow, and then her face came clear, pale from the cold, hair stuck in dark lines to her cheek, mouth pressed in a straight line like she'd practiced not letting it tremble. Her voice was thin and careful, as if words might break if she set them down too hard. "I just need somewhere dry for the night." The sentence drifted into the rain and felt honest. No promise, no backstory, no angle. Just a need measured in hours. Mark's fingers tightened on the edge of the door. He could still close it. He could pretend he hadn't heard. He could choose the option he could explain to any reasonable adult. He could also choose the one he could explain to his daughter when she was older and asked who he had decided to be. He nodded once, almost to himself, heart steadying as if a decision was a kind of shelter too. He slid the chain the rest of the way off the track. The metal made a small, final sound. He opened the door. The door creaked wider, and the storm's sound rushed in with her silhouette. Mark stepped back to make space, though every instinct in him still argued the opposite. The woman hesitated at the threshold, blinking against the light, as if stepping inside someone's home required more courage than facing the rain. "You can come in," he said quietly, his voice almost lost under the thunder. She nodded once and crossed the line between cold and warmth. The air smelled faintly of wet fabric and machine oil from his jacket hanging on the rack. Water dripped from her sleeves, spotting the thin carpet in dark ovals. She hugged her arms to her chest and glanced around. The small kitchen to the left, the tired sofa near the window, the muted cartoon paused on the TV. It wasn't much, but it was shelter. I'll leave in the morning," she said quickly, as though he might change his mind if she said anything more. Mark shook his head slightly, pulling the door closed behind her. "It's fine. The couch isn't much, but it's dry. There's a blanket in the closet." Her lips parted, ready to thank him, but the words caught in her throat. Exhaustion had stolen her voice long before the rain had found her. A soft creak came from down the hallway, Lily's door. Mark turned his head, and a small face peeked out, sleepy-eyed and curious. "Daddy, who's that?" she asked, rubbing one eye with her hand, the other hand clutching her stuffed bear. Mark managed a small smile, trying to make the moment sound simple. "Just someone who needs a roof for the night, sweetheart." The girl's bare feet patted softly on the floor. She disappeared for a second and returned with her small pink blanket bunched in her arms. It was frayed at the corners, faded from too many washes, but she held it out to the woman without hesitation. "It's warm," Lily said. "You can have it." For a second, the woman didn't move. Then her eyes filled, glistening not from rain this time, but from something fragile, something she hadn't felt in a long while. She crouched slightly to Lily's level, her voice a whisper. "Thank you, little one." Mark watched quietly, struck by how easily kindness flowed from his daughter, unguarded and whole, when he himself had to wrestle it through doubt. The woman, Emily, he'd later learn, pressed the blanket to her chest like it was something sacred. He walked to the kitchen and busied himself with the kettle, mostly to give them both space to breathe. "There's some soup left if you're hungry," he said over his shoulder. "It's not fancy, canned tomato and whatever spices I could find." She nodded. "That sounds perfect." He poured the steaming soup into a chipped bowl and handed it to her along with a spoon. Her hands trembled slightly as she took it, fingers pink from the cold. For a moment, she didn't eat. She just held the bowl close, letting the warmth seep in. Then she took a careful sip and exhaled as though it hurt to feel comfort again. Mark sat across from her, the heater rattling softly between them. The flickering light made the room feel smaller, but not uncomfortable, more like a place that held its breath for peace. "You don't have to tell me anything," Mark said after a while. "I've had nights where talking didn't help much anyway." She looked up at him then, really looked, and something in his calm seemed to settle her own nerves. "Thank you," she said, "for not asking." He nodded. Silence filled the space after that, not awkward, just quiet. Lily had gone back to bed, though the small lamp still glowed in her room. The storm thinned outside, its anger reduced to a steady hum against the windows. Emily finished the soup slowly. "You have a kind daughter," she murmured. "Yeah," Mark replied softly. "She got that from her mom." The words slipped out before he could guard them. Emily's eyes lifted again, gentle but searching. "She's not." He shook his head once. 3 years. She didn't offer pity, and he appreciated that more than she could know. I'm sorry, was all she said, her tone honest, not heavy. It's all right, he replied, though he didn't really know if it was. Minutes stretched, comfortable enough that he caught himself almost forgetting she was a stranger. Her shoulders began to relax, her eyes no longer darting toward the door. He noticed she kept one hand curled around the edge of the blanket Lily had given her, holding on to it even when she set the bowl aside. When she finally settled onto the couch, he turned off the kitchen light, leaving only the soft orange from the heater. Her face looked peaceful now, framed by wet hair drying in uneven waves. Good night, he said quietly. She nodded from the couch. Good night, Mark. And thank you. He paused in the hallway, hearing her say his name for the first time. It sounded strange, softer somehow, like a promise that this night would be remembered. He looked once more toward the window, where raindrops traced slow paths down the glass. Somewhere beyond it, the city kept rushing, but inside the apartment, time seemed to stop. A small, tired man, his sleeping daughter, and a stranger who had nowhere left to go, sharing the simplest kind of grace. A dry place, a warm blanket, and the quiet company of kindness. The storm outside began to ease, but the room still carried the rhythm of rain, a steady percussion against glass, patient and familiar. Mark sat at the edge of the worn armchair, elbows on his knees, staring into the faint orange glow from the heater. The hum of its old fan filled the silences between thoughts he didn't want to unpack. Across from him, Emily rested on the couch, wrapped in Lily's pink blanket. Her damp hair clung to her neck, and steam from the soup bowl lingered faintly in the air, mingling with the scent of rain-soaked clothes. Neither of them spoke for a long time. It wasn't the kind of quiet that needed breaking. It felt necessary, the hush that comes after too many words have already been spent elsewhere. Mark found himself watching the shadow of her hand as it moved across the blanket, tracing lines only she could see. He wanted to ask who she was running from. What had happened to leave her standing in the rain with nothing but the clothes on her back? But he knew that look, the hollow focus of someone trying to survive the next hour, not the whole story. He'd lived that stare himself after the funeral, when neighbors had shown up with casseroles and condolences and too many questions. Instead, he asked the simplest thing, "You warm enough?" She looked up, surprised by the gentleness of it. "Yeah," she whispered, voice scratchy but steady. "Warmer than I've been in a long time." He nodded. "Good." He turned the heater dial a little higher anyway, pretending it made a difference. Emily's gaze wandered toward the framed photo on the shelf, a young woman with kind eyes and the same smile Lily wore when she was proud of herself. "Your wife?" she asked softly. Mark hesitated, following her eyes. "Yeah, Hannah." He said her name the way people say something fragile. He stopped, exhaled. She made things simple. Somehow everything made sense when she was here. Emily nodded as if she understood, though her eyes glimmered with something unspoken. "I used to think life had a rhythm too," she murmured. Then one day, it just stopped keeping time. Mark looked at her then, not the wet clothes or tired face, but the way she said that, like she'd been holding that sentence for years and it had finally found air. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. She smiled faintly. "Don't be. We all lose something we didn't think we could live without." The heater rattled again, punctuating the truth between them. Lily's laughter echoed faintly from her room, a sleepy dream sound that drifted into the quiet. Emily's expression softened instantly, and Mark caught it. That reflexive warmth, the way people look at light after being too long in darkness. "She's a good kid," Emily said. "She's my reason for keeping everything together," Mark replied. "Sometimes I think she's the one keeping me together instead." The corners of Emily's mouth curved upward just enough to count as a smile. Kids have that power. They don't even know it. Mark leaned back, rubbing a hand across his face. "You remind me a little of her," he said, not realizing how strange it might sound until it was already out. "Not the way you look, just the quiet. The way you're holding everything in, pretending you're fine." Emily looked down at her hands. "Pretending gets you through the night," she said softly. He didn't argue. Outside, thunder rolled one last time before fading into the distance. The streetlights flickered, and for a heartbeat, the whole apartment went dark. Mark reached instinctively for the flashlight on the counter. Then the light returned, dim but steady. He chuckled under his breath. Emily tilted her head. "What?" "Nothing." he said, smiling faintly. It's just, this place always feels like it's holding its breath. I keep waiting for everything to fall apart, but somehow it just keeps going. She looked around the small room. The peeling wallpaper, the chipped table, the child's drawings pinned to the wall with tape. It's not falling apart, she said softly. It's still standing. That's something. Her words landed heavier than she meant them to. Mark realized they weren't about the apartment at all. He got up, fetched a towel from the closet, and handed it to her. You should dry your hair before you catch something. She took it with a small nod. You don't have to worry about me. Yeah, he said, glancing at the photo of Hannah again. I guess it's a habit now. Emily dried her hair slowly, the towel muffling the sound of rain as it began to fade to drizzle. Her movements were slower now, calmer, as though warmth and safety were things her body had to remember in stages. Thank you, she said suddenly, her voice cutting through the hum of the heater. For what? For not turning me away. Mark shrugged lightly. You just looked like someone who needed a chance to breathe. She smiled, not the polite kind, but one that reached her eyes, small and real. Most people don't look twice. He didn't have an answer for that, so he just nodded again. When the clock struck midnight, Emily shifted under the blanket, finally letting herself sink into the couch. Mark stood to check that the front door was locked and the hallway light off. He paused for a moment, looking at the stranger sleeping in his living room. This quiet presence who had walked out of the storm and into his small world like a question he didn't know he needed to ask. For the first time in months, he didn't feel entirely alone. He turned off the light, leaving only the faint orange glow of the heater. The rain had stopped, and the silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full, like the world itself was resting. In that stillness, somewhere between exhaustion and peace, Mark realized that maybe the universe hadn't forgotten him after all. The world outside had changed overnight. The storm was gone, leaving behind a soaked silence that seemed to cling to everything. The first light of morning crept through the blinds in faint stripes, painting the living room in soft gray. Mark stood in the kitchen, waiting for the old coffee maker to finish its ritual, a sputtering hum followed by the sharp scent that filled the air like memory. He moved quietly so as not to wake Emily, though a part of him wasn't sure she had slept much at all. When he looked over, she was already awake. Sitting upright on the couch, blanket folded neatly beside her, her eyes followed the window, as if she was tracking something far beyond the wet street outside. The exhaustion from the night before was still there, but beneath it now was something else, focus. Morning, he said softly, keeping his voice careful, neutral. She turned toward him and offered a small smile. Good morning. I didn't mean to wake you. You didn't, he lied. Coffee. She nodded. Please. He poured her a cup into the only clean mug left, chipped at the rim, the kind that had seen too many late nights. She wrapped her hands around it, grateful for the warmth. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The quiet was comfortable, almost too gentle for what it carried beneath it. I should go soon, she said finally, staring into her coffee. I don't want to cause any trouble. No trouble, Mark said. You can stay a little longer if you need to get your bearings. Emily looked up then, meeting his eyes. You really mean that, don't you? He gave a half shrug. It's just a couch. Her lips curved in a small, almost wistful smile. Not many people would have opened that door last night. Mark took a sip of his own coffee, trying to hide how much that simple truth hurt to admit. Yeah, well, the world's taught everyone to keep the locks tight. He paused, then added, I guess I never learned the lesson. Emily didn't respond. She set the mug down carefully on the table, aligning it with the edge like she needed control over something, anything. Then she took a quiet breath and asked, Can I make a call? Just one. It won't take long, I promise. He hesitated, not because he didn't trust her, but because the request broke the fragile calm between them. Sure, he said after a moment, reaching for the old cordless phone on the counter. Reception's better by the window. Thank you. She took the phone with both hands as though it were heavier than it looked. Mark turned away to give her privacy, pretending to focus on the toast he didn't actually plan to eat. Still, he couldn't help but hear the faint rhythm of her voice. Low, composed, deliberate. Good morning. It's me, she said softly, almost too calm. A pause. Yes, I'm fine. Another pause, longer this time. I've made a decision. Please arrange it exactly as I said before. Today. Her tone was steady, not the fragile one she'd used last night. It had a quiet authority in it, the kind of tone used by people accustomed to being obeyed. Mark frowned slightly, pretending to scrape butter across the toast. Whoever she was talking to, she wasn't pleading for help. She was giving instructions. The call lasted less than a minute, but when she hung up, something about her was unmistakably different. She handed the phone back carefully. "Thank you," she said, voice light, but there was a calm certainty beneath it now, the kind that came from knowing a plan was already in motion. "No problem," he replied, trying not to sound curious. "Everything okay?" "Yes," she said. "Better than okay." She looked around the small kitchen one last time. The flickering light, the uneven tiles, the pile of unopened mail near the fridge. Then her eyes softened when they landed on a small detail, Lily's crayon drawing of the three of them taped to the wall, herself, her dad, and a woman with long hair in a yellow dress. Emily's gaze lingered there longer than she probably meant it to. "She's lucky," she said quietly. "Your daughter." Mark smiled faintly, a little tired, a little proud. "I think I'm the lucky one." Emily held his eyes for a heartbeat. Maybe both. Then she stood, folded the blanket neatly, and set it on the couch. She picked up her bag, a small, worn purse that looked far too empty, and slung it over her shoulder. "Thank you for last night," she said, her tone gentle but clear. "You didn't know who I was, but you helped me anyway. People rarely do that anymore." He opened his mouth to respond, but the words wouldn't come. It was strange how quickly a stranger could feel like a story you'd already lived through. Before he could find something to say, she was already at the door. The rain had stopped, and the sunlight outside was pale but promising. She looked back once, her expression unreadable, somewhere between gratitude and farewell. "Take care of yourself, Mark," she said softly. "You too, Emily," he replied. She smiled faintly, the kind of smile that suggested she knew something he didn't. Then she stepped out, her reflection fading from the window pane as she disappeared down the quiet, wet street. Mark stood there for a long time, holding the silence she left behind. The phone still sat on the counter, its small screen dim, as if it had just carried something far larger than either of them could understand. He took another sip of coffee, trying to shake the feeling that the day had already changed, though he couldn't yet tell how. Outside, the puddles mirrored the early sun. Inside, the air felt lighter but not empty, like the echo of a door closing on one chapter and quietly opening another. By afternoon, the storm was only a memory. The city looked scrubbed clean, its edges softened by sunlight reflecting off puddles that refused to fade. Mark had already put in a long day at the repair shop, the kind of day that left oil under his nails and a dull ache in his shoulders. The work wasn't glorious, but it was honest, and it kept the lights on. Barely. He wiped his hands on a rag as the garage door rolled down, sealing the smell of metal and gasoline behind him. His phone buzzed with a message from Lily's teacher reminding him about Friday's parent meeting. He sighed and tucked it away, promising himself he'd find the time. Somehow he always did. When he reached his apartment building, the sun was dipping low behind the rooftops, turning the wet pavement into sheets of gold. For a second, he thought everything might just be normal again. Another day survived. Another night to rest before the next round of bills and repairs and quiet promises to keep going. Then he saw it. A sleek black car was parked outside his building. It didn't belong there, too polished, too quiet, the kind of car that looked like it had never touched a pothole in its life. Two people stood near it, both in dark suits that didn't fit the neighborhood. They spotted him immediately and straightened, their posture sharp but polite. "Mr. Mark Evans?" the man asked. His voice was steady, professional. Mark's first thought was debt collectors. His stomach tightened. "Yeah." The woman beside him smiled faintly, holding a sealed envelope. "We're with the Bennett Foundation. Miss Emily Bennett asked us to deliver this to you personally." Emily Bennett. The name hit him like static through the air, familiar yet impossible. "You mean," he hesitated. "Emily? She was here last night. You must have the wrong person." The man shook his head. "No mistake, sir. She asked that this reach you today." The woman stepped forward and extended the envelope. Her nails were perfectly manicured, her tone respectful but final. "She also asked that we tell you. No return message is necessary." Mark stared at the envelope without taking it. "What is this?" "Her instructions were to let you read it yourself," she said simply. He finally accepted it, the paper heavier than it should have been. The car doors opened, and within seconds they were gone, their black sedan slipping into traffic like it had never stopped at all. The hallway to his apartment felt longer than usual. Lily's drawings were still taped to the walls. Rainbows, cars, a family of 3 smiling under a yellow sun. He looked at them while his mind spun. Emily Bennett. Foundation. A name that didn't belong to someone standing outside in the rain last night. Inside the apartment, the air was still. He dropped his work bag by the couch, sat down slowly, and broke the seal on the envelope. Inside was a single folded letter and a check. His hands froze mid-motion when he saw the number printed in neat ink. $250,000. He blinked, certain his eyes had tricked him. He checked again. The same impossible number stared back at him. The room went quiet, even the refrigerator hum seeming to pause. He unfolded the letter carefully, recognizing the handwriting immediately, the same neat curves she'd used to sign her name on the napkin she'd left by the soup bowl. Dear Mark, you opened your door to a stranger without asking who she was, what she had, or what she could give you in return. You saw a person, not a problem. My name is Emily Bennett, CEO of Bennett Industries and founder of the Bennett Foundation. Last night, I wasn't running from danger. I was running from myself, from the noise, the weight of being surrounded by people who look but never see. You reminded me that humanity still exists in quiet corners of the world. Consider this not charity, but gratitude. Use it to build the life your daughter deserves. You gave me more than shelter. You gave me a reason to believe again. Emily. He read it 3 times, each slower than the last. His hands trembled until the paper fluttered softly onto his lap. A laugh escaped him, short, disbelieving, almost a sob. He leaned back against the couch, staring at the ceiling. You've got to be kidding me, he whispered to no one. Lily's voice broke through the haze. Daddy. He turned. She was standing in the doorway, still in her school clothes, holding a small drawing, 3 stick figures, and a heart. Why are you crying? She asked, wide-eyed. Mark tried to speak, but his throat felt thick. He reached out, pulling her close, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. Because, sweetheart, he whispered, his voice rough with awe, sometimes the smallest kindness can change everything. Lily smiled, confused but happy, wrapping her small arms around his neck. The drawing crumpled slightly between them. For a long moment, Mark just held her. The envelope sat on the table beside them, silent and unreal, the kind of thing that could rewrite a life but could never measure the moment that made it possible. He looked at the rain-streaked window and thought of Emily. Not the CEO, not the name in the letter, but the soaked, trembling woman who had stood under the broken streetlight and met his eyes with quiet pain. He realized then that kindness wasn't about rescue. It was about recognition, the simple act of saying, I see you. The storm had left behind a new kind of clarity. And as he sat there with his daughter's arms around him, Mark understood something he hadn't in years. Hope doesn't arrive in grand gestures. It walks in, drenched, shivering, and asks for a place to rest. The days that followed blurred into a rhythm of disbelief. For the first 24 hours, Mark kept expecting someone to knock on his door, to tell him there'd been a mistake, that the check wasn't real, that Emily Bennett didn't exist, that people like him didn't just stumble into miracles. But no one came. The bank verified the check, the funds cleared, and the numbers in his account changed from something he feared to look at into something that made his knees weak. Still, he didn't celebrate. He just sat for a long time in the kitchen chair, staring at the confirmation slip while the coffee went cold. His mind kept returning to that night, to the sound of the rain, to the way she had held Lily's pink blanket like it was worth more than anything she owned. He couldn't quite reconcile the woman shivering in his doorway with the powerful name printed beneath the word CEO, Bennett Industries. But he didn't waste it. He couldn't. Within a week, the unpaid bills were gone. The broken heater, the same one that coughed and wheezed every winter, was replaced by a new, quiet system that filled the apartment with a steady warmth he'd almost forgotten was possible. He bought Lily new shoes, the ones she'd circled in the catalog but never asked for because she knew money was tight. When she ran across the living room in them, squealing with joy, he caught himself laughing too, a sound that felt strange and wonderful in his own throat. Then came the big decision. For years, he'd fixed other people's cars in a garage that wasn't his, handing most of what he earned to a boss who never remembered his name. Now, with a balance in his account that didn't look like survival anymore, he signed the papers for a lease, a small auto repair shop at the edge of town. It wasn't fancy, but it was his. He painted the sign himself, Evans Auto Care. The letters weren't perfectly straight, but that didn't matter. When Lily saw it, she hugged him so tight, he thought his ribs might crack. On opening day, only 2 customers came by, both curious neighbors who'd seen the sign go up. He worked with care, polishing every detail until his hands ached, the same way he always had. The difference now was in the air, a quiet pride, a sense of stability settling in after years of struggle. Each night, when he locked up the shop, he'd glance at the framed photo he'd hung near the counter. Lily grinning in her new shoes, holding a wrench too big for her hands. Below it, he'd taped a small note, "Never stop being that person." Emily's words. And he didn't. He refused to let the money change who he was. He still walked Lily to school every morning, still packed her lunches himself, still stopped by the grocery store for discounted produce even when he didn't have to. But the weight was gone, that invisible pressure that used to sit behind every smile and every good night. One evening, after locking up, he drove back through the neighborhood where he'd once seen Emily standing in the rain. The streetlight was fixed now, glowing steadily. He slowed down and parked by the curb for a moment. The memory came back in fragments. Her eyes, the tremor in her voice, the way she had looked around as if the world had forgotten her. He realized that, maybe, she hadn't just been testing humanity. Maybe she had needed proof that kindness still existed in a place small enough to feel real. That night, after Lily went to bed, he sat at the kitchen table with the old envelope. He reread the letter slowly, tracing each line as if it might fade away someday. "You gave me a reason to believe again." He wondered if she ever thought of him too, the quiet mechanic who hadn't known he was helping a stranger find her own humanity. The following weekend, Lily brought home a school project, "Draw Your Hero." She'd sketched the garage, the sign, and herself handing him a wrench. Beneath it, she'd written in uneven handwriting, "My hero is my dad because he never gives up, even when things are hard." Mark sat staring at it for a long time, blinking back a feeling that was too full to name. He framed it beside the photo in the shop the next day. The repair shop began to grow slowly, one customer recommending another, then another. His hands still bore grease and cuts, but now each mark meant something different, not survival, but purpose. Sometimes, between fixing engines and helping Lily with homework, he would glance at the letter again and think about how one simple act, opening a door, had rewritten everything he believed about luck, faith, and people. He didn't believe in fate before. Now he wasn't so sure. Because every time the wind carried the smell of rain through the open shop door, he found himself looking toward the street, half expecting to see her again, the woman who had taught him that the smallest kindness could move mountains. The months drifted by quietly, filled with the small, steady patterns of a life rebuilt. The shop stayed modest, but word of mouth had spread. Mark had customers who trusted him now, who came not just for repairs, but for his calm honesty. The apartment upstairs had changed too, new curtains, warm lights, the faint scent of lavender that Lily insisted on keeping near her window. Evenings were softer now, their laughter no longer shadowed by exhaustion. Still, sometimes when the air turned heavy before a storm, Mark would glance toward the window and remember that night, the knock he never heard but still answered. He wondered what had become of Emily Bennett. He had imagined writing her a letter more than once, but every time he read her words again, "No return message is necessary," he put the pen down. It was a Wednesday when the past came back quietly. He had just finished wiping grease from his hands after fixing a customer's radiator when his phone buzzed, a reminder to pick up Lily from school. He locked the garage, slid into his old truck, and headed down Maple Avenue, the one lined with bare trees and hand-painted fences. The world looked normal, calm, the kind of calm that hides change just behind the next corner. He parked near the playground, scanning for Lily's familiar ponytail among the children. She spotted him first and came running, her backpack bouncing, her smile wide. "Daddy," she shouted, waving a paper in the air. "I got an A on my reading test." He knelt to catch her, pride swelling in his chest. "Of course you did, sweetheart," he said, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. "I knew you would." They walked toward the truck, Lily chattering about school, when a sleek black car turned the corner and slowed near the curb. Mark noticed it out of habit, the same kind of vehicle that had once stopped outside his building months ago. He thought nothing of it until the door opened. She stepped out. For a moment, the noise of the playground faded. Emily Bennett, though he still struggled to connect that name to the woman who had once stood drenched and trembling in the rain, crossed the sidewalk with the same calm grace she had that morning she left. But she was dressed differently now. Simple jeans, a light sweater, her hair tied back in a way that made her look younger, freer. The elegance of power had been replaced by something warmer, humbler. Lily tugged on his hand. "Daddy, who's that?" He didn't answer at first. Emily smiled as she approached, stopping just a few feet away. The late afternoon sun caught her eyes, clear, steady, almost amused. "Looks like things turned around," she said. Mark blinked, half in disbelief, half in awe. "You could say that." He managed a small, genuine smile. "I didn't think I'd ever see you again." Emily's smile deepened, soft but certain. "Neither did I. But I was nearby for a meeting and thought I'd check for myself. You'd be surprised how many people forget what they do with second chances." He chuckled, rubbing the back of his neck. "I tried not to waste it. Still not sure what to call what you did for us." "You don't have to call it anything," she said. "You earned it the moment you opened that door." Lily peeked from behind his arm, curious but shy. Emily crouched slightly, offering a kind smile. "You must be Lily," she said softly. "I remember your blanket. It kept me warm when I needed it most." The girl grinned, pride lighting up her small face. "You're welcome." Emily laughed quietly, and the sound was light, not the guarded laugh of someone protecting secrets, but the genuine kind that belonged to someone finally at peace. She stood again, glancing at Mark. "I never forgot that night. Sometimes, when the world feels too polished, I think about that little apartment, the rain, and the way you didn't ask questions." Mark looked down for a moment, then met her eyes. "It wasn't much, but it was what I could give." "That's the thing about kindness," she said. "It's never measured by what's given, only by the heart that gives it." He nodded slowly. "I think you were right. That night changed everything. Not just for me, for Lily too. She got her home back, her dad back. And me. I got a reason to start over." Emily's eyes softened. "You gave me one too," she said simply. "That call I made wasn't just about money, Mark. It was about balance. I had spent years building things that didn't matter. That night reminded me what did." They stood in silence for a moment, the noise of children playing around them like distant music. The late sun spilled across the street, warm and golden. Mark smiled faintly. "You know, I used to think it was that phone call that changed my life." Emily shook her head gently, her expression turning thoughtful. "No, Mark," she said, her voice low but certain. "It wasn't the call. It was the kindness that came before it." For a long moment, they simply looked at each other, two people bound not by chance, but by the rare understanding that sometimes life doesn't reward effort or luck, but grace. Lily tugged on his sleeve again. "Daddy, can we go for ice cream?" He smiled. "Yes, sweetheart. We can." Emily laughed softly. "Go. Enjoy your evening." He hesitated, then extended his hand. "Thank you, Emily, for everything." She took it, her grip firm and warm. "No, Mark," she said with a gentle smile. "Thank you." Then she turned, walking back to her car as the light shifted toward sunset. Mark watched her go, his reflection merging with hers for an instant in the glass of the departing car. The moment was quiet but full, the closing of a circle neither of them had meant to draw. And when he lifted Lily into the truck and drove away, he didn't look back. He didn't have to. Because sometimes, he thought, the people who enter your life for a single night are the ones who leave something permanent, not debt or obligation, but proof that goodness, even when small, can outlast everything else. The months rolled quietly into seasons. The chill of winter came and went, replaced by the soft renewal of spring, and Mark's life found a rhythm that no longer carried the weight of struggle. The shop was steady, the bills were paid, and laughter filled the apartment upstairs every evening when he and Lily cooked dinner together. Sometimes he'd catch himself watching her as she stirred sauce or read aloud from a schoolbook, realizing how much brighter her voice had become, how much lighter both their hearts were. He never spent lavishly. He didn't trade the old truck for something new or move into a bigger house. Instead, he fixed what was broken, in the home, in the shop, and in himself. He found peace not in the check Emily had given him, but in the reason behind it. The money had repaired his life, but kindness had repaired something deeper. On the first anniversary of that night, rain returned to the city. It came softly at first, then harder, beating against the windows with the same restless rhythm that had once carried a stranger to his doorstep. Lily had already gone to bed, her small nightlight glowing through the half-open door. Mark stood at the window again, the same spot where he had first seen Emily beneath the streetlight, her figure blurred by the storm. He thought about how easily life could turn on a single moment. One decision, one act of compassion, one door opened when logic said to close it. He remembered the fear he'd felt that night, the hesitation, and the way it had all vanished the instant she'd stepped inside. He smiled faintly. The rain fell harder, tracing silvery lines down the glass. He whispered to himself, "Guess you were right, Emily. It really wasn't the call." He turned toward the living room. The heater hummed quietly, steady and warm. On the wall above the couch hung 3 framed pictures. One of Hannah holding Lily as a baby, one of him and Lily in front of the garage, and the newest one, a photograph from the school fair, Lily sitting on his shoulders, both laughing. Beneath them, in a small wooden frame, was the letter Emily had written, carefully preserved behind glass. Every time he looked at it, he felt the same humbling gratitude, not because of the money, but because of the reminder that people were capable of goodness without reason. That somewhere in the chaos of survival, grace still found its way to ordinary lives. Outside, thunder rumbled softly, but it no longer sounded like loneliness. It sounded like memory. He thought of Emily, not as a benefactor or a business name, but as the woman who had looked lost and cold and yet somehow carried the power to change everything. He wondered if she still thought about that night. Maybe she did. Maybe she didn't. But he liked to believe that sometimes, when she looked out over the city lights from her glass office high above the streets, she remembered the small apartment where someone had opened a door without asking who she was. Mark stepped out onto the small balcony. The rain kissed his face, cold but not cruel. The street below glistened under the same repaired light that had once shone on her. He closed his eyes for a moment, breathing in the smell of wet asphalt and clean air. When he opened them again, the world looked new, as if the storm had washed away more than dust. He turned back toward the door, listening to Lily's faint humming from her bedroom. That sound, that life, that peace, all of it had grown from a single night when he chose trust over fear. He glanced once more at the framed letter on the wall before switching off the light. Never stop being that person. The room settled into darkness, except for the faint glow of the streetlight cutting through the rain. It shimmered softly across the floor like a quiet echo of that first night, a reminder that sometimes destiny doesn't arrive with grand signs or loud voices. Sometimes it stands outside in the rain, waiting for someone brave enough to open the door. And Mark had. He closed the window, smiling to himself as the rain whispered on.